All right, time to talk about session design. And this will be a good one because we'll start to put things together. And there's a very deliberate reason why we're not talking about session design until module 9 within this course is because to write better sessions, we first have to really understand training principles and the training variables we have. And we want to be very much thinking like, where are we going with our sessions and our programs and our strategy? And so many people just start writing sessions, which is fine, but we want to think strategically to achieve superior results. Now, though, we'll look at some elements of the training session and then think about some key considerations when we are writing our training sessions. And then in other lectures within this module, we'll dive into some base structures when designing sessions. So we did some splits before, but then we'll show you some guidelines and some options to help you create some nice foundational sessions. And that'll just give you some ideas when you're prescribing sessions moving forward. First, though, when we think about the training session, it's really important that we understand all our elements and know how to use them and how they interact with each other and influence each other, not just within the session themselves, but across the microcycles. How do other sessions impact what you may be doing in one session too? Now, with a session, we'll always have like your big exercises, your primaries, but obviously we want to have some form of warm-up, and that's going to allow us to perform. Some people call it a warm-up, some people call it movement prep. Once we've done our warm-up, we transition into our primary exercises or our A series, and they're your main exercise for the day. Following that, we have our supportive exercises, and that would be classed in terms of exercise order as your B series. And then following that, you'd have your accessory and or remedial exercises, which follow the primary and supportive, and that would be your C series onwards. It's important to flag though that if you are using straight sets versus say supersets or even like trisets or giant sets, the A series or B series could look or feel quite different. And a B series with a straight set prescription could very much be a pseudo or a hybrid primary exercise. But if you're doing an A1 to A4 giant set as your A series, how much of that B series is really supporting that'll vary. So design considerations when it comes to training sessions. Well, there's quite a few. And when it comes to programming, there's the saying or a quote that I really like is that, well, you can do anything, but not everything. And I feel that when people are designing sessions, often they try to do a little bit of everything, but that can result in you achieving a lot of nothing. And that's really important to remember because certain people and certain goals will require more specificity, and you don't always want to try to do everything. And while a client may want to do a bit of everything, it's up to you as a coach to marry up the right combination of training protocols and prescriptions to suit the session for that phase. So other considerations when we're thinking about design is, of course, who is the client? Because that'll obviously be impacting goals, preferences, intensity prescriptions, exercises, and what is the macro cycle end goal that you have decided upon? Because again, a client may have a goal of fat loss, but your training prescription could have a macro cycle end goal of increasing relative strength, or it could be a functional hypertrophy focused end goal. But the nutritional prescription may be quite different to or allow that achievement of that goal. It might not be quite as optimal. We also want to think about the mesocycle strategy as well. So the training phase. So what is the strength quality and the adaptations you're hoping to achieve within that phase? It's like, what is that training stimulus you want to prescribe? Because If you're wanting a more endurance or metabolic stimulus, and then you go and prescribe a primary lift, which is 10 times 3, resting 240 seconds between each set, that's not a metabolic stimulus. Likewise, when we're thinking about the training sessions, we always want harmony and synergy between all factors of the session and the program, because everything can have a connection and they're not really existing in isolation. Some things potentially can, but other things not so much. And so when we think about harmony and synergy when designing training sessions, we very much want to think about the macro end goal, the strategy or the objective of the training cycle, or the mesocycle. What is the nature of the microcycle? So what are the splits? What days do you train on? How often are you training? What exercises are you prescribing? All those really, really matter a lot. And a lower A day and a lower B day, they can very much work together. And that's really, really important to note, because if we just focus on a single session and forget about the others, more often than not, it may be suboptimal, especially over time. Now, other factors when we're thinking about session design is very much like what are our primary exercises, so our dominant exercises of the day. What is the exercises used, and what are the intensity and volume prescriptions, so sets and reps. We also want to think about the design of the session and the type of sets employed. So as I said right at the start, are we using antagonist supersets, agonist supersets, straight sets, giant sets? Like, what are you employing? We also want to be very much thinking about, obviously, the other prescriptions which follow the A series of primary exercise, because again, they work synergistically. Are they more specific and matched to the A series or more varied? Now, if we dive into the warm-up, depending on the client and the goal and their needs, what you do here can vary greatly. Yet the ultimate goal of a warm-up is to just simply prepare a client physically and mentally to optimally perform within the session. And also you're trying to lower the injury risk potential as well. And you can't just rock up from the street and walk under a bar in a squat cage and squat your true 1 RM. Your nervous system isn't ready for that. You may be able to get somewhat close-ish, but we have to prepare to perform. And I think a lot of people think about the warm-up and it's flop around on a foam roller, and they prioritize burning their butt off with booty band work, and 25 minutes later, they're still flopping around on a foam roller looking at Instagram. Well, is that really optimal? It's okay. But to me, the warm-up signifies the transition time whereby we go from life mode to training mode. And so we want to be focused and locked in mentally. And little things like simply just putting on headphones and having some you time and getting the right music or getting the right mental state is really important. But ultimately though, the most appropriate warm-up will very much center around the client and the task you're about to perform. And so if you're going to deadlift, clearly there should be some movement prep, if that's your primary lift, to support deadlifting potential. That's your A series exercise. Crucially though, we want to start warming up with a lower intensity and then progressively ramp it up over time until you're ready to perform. And this is where so many people go wrong, and they often don't prioritize this. And if you think about common bro lifters at the gym doing a bench press, they rock up, they put a 20 kg or 45 pound plate on the bar, punch out 10 reps, put another 20 kg per side on the bar, punch out a few reps. Ooh, that was pretty hard. And now let's start. Or maybe that was their start. Like, that is insufficient to optimally perform. But ultimately, we want that warm-up to be efficient and effective. It doesn't need to be excessively long in terms of duration or excessively complex. We just want it to work. If in doubt. So time is always going to be your enemy with a lot of clients in terms of being able to do a lot. And so the warm-up is something that can be somewhere that you can create more time for a client to do more work or superior work within a training session if we do the right things and prioritize certain things and just make it really efficient to ensure they can perform and do so quicker. So there's an acronym that I like to use if we're in doubt of not sure what to do, and that's the RAMP acronym. And that stands for Raise, Activate, Mobilize, and Potentiate. So this acronym is a nice one for helping you think about elements we want to get you in a prepared state to perform for set one of your A-series primary exercise. So with the RAMP acronym, we're basically trying to raise blood flow, breathing rate, heart rates, and we're trying to get the body ready to perform. And with that, we want to get some stimulatory action of the muscles, but it's important to flag that your muscles aren't inactive. Rather, we're trying to upregulate the neural signaling to those muscles. Muscles don't just magically turn on or off, but they can be downregulated. And so that potentiation or the priming or the stimulation of the nervous system is absolutely essential. Clearly though, like we can throw in mobility work as well. We mobilize key joints. So think about the exercises you're about to perform and any limiting factors you may have. But some of these can be formed or performed all at once. And so potentiation will occur very much by just doing warm-up sets of progressively heavier intensity. And by doing that, you're going to raise your body temperature, breathing rate, get increased blood flow. Those muscles will get upregulated. And with a load, hypothetically on your back, you will have essentially a loaded stretch and you will aid mobilization as well, just by doing warm-up building sets. So if you're short in time and if in doubt, prioritize potentiation of the nervous system. So stimulation of the nervous system, because that's very much what you want to focus on. And subsequent sets, so prior sets can stimulate potential on subsequent sets. So that's why that ramping intensity to build you up to set one is so important. Now, that doesn't mean you can't throw in booty band stuff, bracing work, or ankle or hip mobility. 100% you can. We just want to be mindful of over prescribing and trying to do too much within a session. So pick a few priorities is what I usually say, and then get into some building sets of your priority exercises. Speaking of, so primary exercises for a training session. So typically class in terms of exercise order as your A-series exercises for the day. These would be your main lifts, and often the training cycle or phase may be more designed around their enhancement, or they're being used to target certain priority muscles or muscle groups to develop. Typically, they would be more multi-joint, compound, more complex lifts, but not always. And usually they will have the lowest reps of the day because they'll be using heavier intensities, but not always. The reason why there's the buts and the whys comes down to the programming and the context and the client. And so with this, you could have a physique athlete that has a 5th training day, which is a little bit different to the other days. And their key isolation exercises that are very specifically and strategically applied or prescribed, to enhance their physique. And think male examples, just biceps and triceps. Females, they could be more shoulder work, more glute work, but it might not be a super complex lift. And our evolution, so Mark and myself, like probably 5, 10 years ago, we weren't using things like hip thrusts and glute bridges as an A series lift or primary lift. Now, for certain clientele, absolutely we do, because we've evolved and changed our attitudes as our clientele has evolved, and those clients' needs is so important to factor in. And so anything can be a primary, but it depends on the phase objective. And again, it depends on the training days. And if you have a higher training frequency across the microcycle, so if you're training more often, very rarely are you going to be doing back squats or bench press as a primary lift for all 5 sessions as your A series. The reason why a lower rep prescription would usually occur, or contextually lower rep relative to the supportive and accessory exercises that follow, will very much come down to be more fresh, less neural fatigue. And so if you're using more complex multi-joint exercises, especially of the movement type, typically that'll work synergistically with lower to mid reps. And it's easier to do them when you're fresh. But then when you're fatigued, yeah, you can still do 5 reps of a leg extension as a D series exercise. But is that appropriate? Maybe it's better to do 12 reps. Likewise, if you're doing a barbell back squat and you're trying to teach a client how to do it, would you prefer to do it as an A series for 8 reps or as a D series for 20 reps? Personally, I'd prefer to teach a skill or a movement or focus in on a priority and do it first. And often those sort of mid reps or lower to mid reps can allow better quality of execution. And so that's usually why that's happening. Ultimately, though, when it comes to primary exercises, like nothing is compulsory unless you're a strength sport athlete, because you're a weightlifter, you have to snatch and you have to clean the deadlift. Powerlifters, obviously, same compulsory lifts. However, you can still use the variation and differences in technique to support yourself or your client's needs. Other things to know when it comes to A series, again, is that think about synergy and harmony, because those A series primary exercise prescriptions, not just the exercises, but the prescriptions, that'll impact what you do in the rest of that training session. And also it can impact other training sessions across the microcycle. Because if you prescribe a hinge pattern on your lower A, on your lower B training session within that cycle, if you want a balanced training prescription, you're probably going to be prescribing more of a quad-based, squat-based movement. Same thing if you're thinking about pushing and pulling or pushing. If you're not doing any of a training bias, you're probably going to push one way on one day and push the other way on another day. Same thing with pulling. So what you do here can impact what you do there. And so when I'm writing training sessions and training programs across the microcycle, personally, I'm not just going to write, okay, lower A, here's all the sessions, here's everything, and what do I want to do for lower B? I'm writing the top stuff first, and then I'm going to think, okay, I've done this here and this here in my A's. Now what I want in the B's here and the B's there. And that would be a lower and lower. But I'm also thinking about if I've prescribed this prescription, so say if I've deadlifted on my lower B day as a heavy thing, and I've kind of cooked my lower back or just my posterior chain as a whole, do I want to, on the very next training day, on upper body day, prescribe a whole lot of bent over rows, dumbbell one arm rows, a lot of like trunk stabilization stuff? Maybe not, because even though it's a lower day and an upper day, I still want to think about the synergy and the impact of other training sessions. And that applies to all elements of that training session. So when we think about the prescriptions, you have to really think carefully about the client and the context and the goal, the objective. You're not just going, okay, for this training session, for this phase, let's do German volume training 10 times 10. But if your goal, your client is a beginner, that's probably not appropriate, especially if they have a certain goal. Okay, so supportive exercises, commonly classed as your B series. And these will follow the primary exercises of the training day. And as the name indicates or suggests, they can support that primary exercise prescription, and they can support the training phase objective. They can be more complementary and more specific, or they can be a little bit more varied. And that'll be dependent upon the goal of the client and the context. Likewise, and crucially, my B series or supportive exercise on one training day could also be complementing and working synergistically with the B series on another day, but also the A series on another day. And so, for instance, if I want to improve someone's deadlifting potential, I want to maybe employ a bit of a training bias, but do I still want to deadlift as my primary exercise on 2 or 3 training sessions across the microcycle? Probably not. However, I could use the B series or supportive exercise on one day to employ a targeted and specific deadlift hinge variation, which could aid deadlifting potential on the other day and work in a synergistic fashion whereby we're enhancing deadlift potential, but this one's a primary exercise at a heavier intensity and maybe the classic standard variant of that. But the other one is subtly and strategically different. Ultimately, though, the supportive exercises will usually be more multi-joint, as with the A series, but again, not always. And so things like a leg curl, a seated row, a pull down, yes, they're machines. Machines are less complex, but they're still really important movements which train crucial muscle groups. And so again, it depends on the client and depends on the client's needs. And so having really strong hamstrings and a posterior chain is really important for athletic performance and just physique potential as a whole, because a lot of people like to train what they can see. And so that posterior chain is super, super important. Likewise, not everybody can be doing heavier chin-ups or chin-ups for 8 reps as a B series, because you may want to train a vertical pull pattern. But if the client is simply not strong enough to do a chin-up, do you really want to prescribe a banded chin-up as a B series for 8 to 10 reps? My answer would be a very strong no. And there's another reason why, which I won't get into now, but we can still train the vertical pull pattern and develop the muscles of the back nicely by using that sort of exercise. And so this is why certain isolation exercises and the machine exercises still can have a lot of benefit, and it can aid what's called structural balance, whereby you're more structurally sound and balanced, whereby different muscle groups are at a more optimal strength ratio in relation to each other, which enhances aesthetic and athletic potential and keeps you healthier for longer. Other considerations for your supportive exercises or your B series, again, pretty much the same as the A series. Is there's a lot, but you also want to be mindful of the same day A series and the other day A series and supportive exercises as well. And so they're, again, working in harmony. Now, I've kind of rammed home the point about the harmony and synergy or the interaction, but when you're thinking about the linkage or interaction of your primary and supportive exercises, you want to think about having the right amount of specificity of variance to support the goal and the phase and the client. And you can train different strength qualities within one session. And so that's really important to remember, because a client may have a physique based goal, so hypertrophy focused, but that doesn't mean they just have to forget about neural development and strength work, especially if they really like some heavier lifting. But yet we want the right blend of that training prescription to suit the phase and then the individual. Because if you go and do 10 times 1 and your goal is hypertrophy, but your A series is 10 times 1, that's taxing, that takes time, it beats your body up. It's not a whole lot of volume or quality reps there in terms of hypertrophy. it's good from a neurological standpoint, not so much for hypertrophy. So we want to think about having the right blend. We want to think about how complementary a varied stimulus could be. And examples of a more complementary one would be, think about your strength qualities and like, what is the strength quality just next to it or over? And so if we want to develop relative strength on a primary lift in a phase, naturally a functional hypertrophy supportive lift could be a very nice complement to that A series. However, if we had that A series, same prescription, relative strength focus, and then our B series is really short rest, metabolic prescription work, 20 reps on a leg extension, 60 seconds rest, excuse me. Yeah, that'll feel hard. Yes, it will hurt. It's very, very different stimulus. So is that quite as optimal? Probably not. It sort of falls into, I'm trying to do a bit of everything, but am I achieving a bit of nothing? So can we marry up the stimulus a bit more and get it a bit closer? And it's not that one stimulus is inferior, it's more how synergistically are they working? Speaking of synergy, we can use our B series or supportive exercises in strategic ways. And so one way we could do that is we could essentially use that B series or supportive exercise to act as a bridge or a link to a past phase or a future phase, whereby we may not be prioritizing that stimulus or that exercise or that muscle group to the same degree as we did previously or will in the A series, but we may preserve an element of that by using it in the B series, or we may lightly introduce a future stimulus or exercise or intensity in the B series. And then in the next phase, we transition to using that in the A series and a better prioritization of that stimulus. And so that's what we're thinking about linking and bridging. And so an example of that would be, let's just say phase one, your A series are a straight set prescription, let's just say 4 times 10. But then in your B and C series, you opt for agonist supersets, the same muscle groups, and you may be going 4 times, well, as a B1 and B2, 4 times 10 plus 12. So B1 could be let's just say a hack squat. And then we rest 30 seconds and we go into B12, which would be a leg extension, and we rest 120 seconds. And that's our B series agonist or metabolic stimulus. And we're introducing that, but maybe only for 3 sets. But then in the next phase, we focus on using that same agonist, same muscle group superset stimulus. We slide it up to the A series. We might do it for 4 sets and we do it earlier. We may rest slightly longer, and that allows us to work a touch harder, lift a heavier load, and we can play with it and prioritize it more. So that's how we can think about synergy between the sessions and the phases and the week, but again, future phases as well. And we can use those B series really strategically. Now, accessory exercises. So these are the exercises that follow your main primary exercises and supportive, and they're performed later as an accessory to your main stuff. So they're your, I don't know, they're your hats, they're your lipsticks, they're your bags, or whatever to your outfit. It's a terrible analogy, I know, but that's all I can think of. Anyways, these can still aid the goal of the phase and the needs of the client. And they'll be typically classified as your C series, your D series, could be EF, depending if you're using straight sets. And you have a lot of flexibility here. And you have a little bit more, probably a lot more flexibility to play around with it a bit more, further customize things to a greater degree. And you'll typically see a few more isolation exercises here, but not always, it depends. We typically see increasingly more machines here, but not always. But we also want to be thinking how specific and varied do we want that prescription to be to the overall phase objective. Good examples, but again, they're not always the examples. Leg curls, latch raises, biceps, triceps, abs, core. Now, when it comes to accessories, consider the client. As always, consider the client, because I've read an accessory twice. Whoops. Here, so one client could have the same goal as another, but due to their ability, the phase objective, and the type of client they are, they may need or benefit from vastly different protocols, despite employing the same main movements or movement patterns early on as like an A series. Because you could have a Gen Pop beginner, a physique athlete, a strength athlete, and I don't know, any athlete who's say field-based. They all could hypothetically squat as their A series, but they could use very different types for very different prescriptions. But then what follows to complete the session could be just so different. And that comes down to the needs of the client and the macro cycle objective and goal. And so a Gen Pop beginner may need more remedial work, whereby we're trying to clean up some discrepancies or key weaknesses, which may limit their potential. So we might be throwing in more bracing work. I'll get into that in a sec, actually. Physique-based clients could see a whole lot of glute bridge work, kickback work, back extension work. But what if that physique-based client is a male who competes in board shorts and in certain federations where it doesn't matter so much? So then we might instead see a whole lot of party pump upper body work to add more volume. You lock into machines, hello biceps, hello triceps, hello lateral raises. Likewise, strength athlete, they have to be very strong at owning certain positions and getting into certain positions. And to be strong and to keep getting better, you also have to stay quite robust, and you can't just repeatedly break down. And so they may have very strategically prescribed exercises to keep their body functioning optimally, just be in an optimal state to stand the higher intensities they have to work at. So they might have split squats, loaded carries, very advanced core work. And then athletic clientele, they might have very different demands of their sport from an energetic standpoint. Is it more endurance based, sprint based, sprints with conditioning based? Likewise, do they move in a straight line or multi-directions? Because if they're a multi-directional athlete, you're going to most likely, you will need a lot more movement across different planes. And so they might be doing a lot more rotational work or anti-rotation work, and they might be lunging and stepping in different angles. But does a male classic physique competitor need to be doing Cossack squats going laterally to the side? No, generally no. All right. Now, remedial focused exercises, so just their accessory exercises, they just have a bit more of a focus on literally being more corrective in nature, and whether you even need these, and then crucially for how long, again, client context dependent. And so here I'm doing what's called Peterson's Poliquin step up, sorry. Very, very low box step up with a deliberate heel elevation, getting knee over toe action, very short, very snappy, focus on knee control, trying to drive knee over toes. And the reason why I'm trying to do that, because I have to stabilize the hip. So the lateral, the glutes, so the external rotators of the hip have to stabilize. But by going knee over toe, I'm really trying to develop vastus medialis. So this crucial low inner quad muscle, which is integral for knee health. And so these sort of exercises can be really beneficial for certain people. And for instance, if you're a powerlifter who's doing a whole lot of lower body low bar squats, and you don't get a whole lot of knee over toe action, that's fine from a performance standpoint, but is the knee structurally not going to be quite as optimal? Or do you have a little bit of an imbalance here or there, which may lead to knee irritations and injury down the line? I don't know. But other things you could think about which could have benefit at certain times to ensure the body keeps functioning optimally for the client would be something like a trap 3 raise, where you're going chest supported, raising up, very lightweight, focusing on lower trap development to ensure optimal functioning of the scapula. So we're working on, it's called scapular humeral rhythm. And that's very much a scenario where you have to have synergy between serratus anterior, upper traps, lower traps. Likewise, we need the shoulder stabilizers, so your external rotators, so your rotator cuff muscle to be strong as well. Likewise, things like face pulls, where you're pulling, rotating, adding that external rotation. But how long do you add these in? It depends. Like, does everyone need them? It depends. Does every client, or sorry, every coach prescribe them? It depends. My background is more in strength and conditioning, and I've got a bit of a clinical background as well. But a lot of my clients are still very much physique based these days, but I still do have some performance baselines. And so it's a delicate balance between trying to make someone grow, but trying to ensure they don't break. And so you want to be mindful of becoming a rehab trainer and just forever viewing a client as they're needing to be wrapped in cotton wool or bubble wrap, and they're always going to break, versus, okay, it's time to push. You need a bit more of a leg extension, a back extension, a push, push, push. We need volume, we need intensity. So maybe the new client you've got, maybe they need a bit more of it, but it's only in there for a phase or two. And it's maybe like 2 sets here or 3 sets there. And then within a phase or two, it's gone. But then maybe you slide it up into your warm up and your movement prep in the future. So there's things you can think about, but whether you use remedial exercises, it depends. Almost done. Final thing is, when we think about rep prescription and intensity for the training session, we want to think, how do we prescribe the reps or the intensities or the protocols for all exercises within that one training session? Are all the reps the same for all exercises? It depends, but usually no. Now, when you think about options for rep prescription post A series, so post primary lifts, the options very much come down to hold the reps constant for all exercises for the training day. So all exercises are hypothetically 10 reps. Another option would be to ascend the reps, where the reps get progressively higher for each new exercise or series of the training session. So A series, 8, B series, 10, C series, 12. Conversely, we could go the other way. So we could ascend reps, 12, 10, 8, just an example. We could have a bit of a hybrid. When I say a hybrid, we could go A series 8, B series 8, C series 10, D series 10. And so examples of that would be, everything's the same, but you got more sets here. The reps are coming down, the reps are coming up. It's a bit of a hybrid, getting slightly heavier, but then held constant. But which option is the most logical or superior? It depends. Usually though, what Mark and I would do and very much encourage would be ascending reps. However, you want to be mindful of you ascending too high and have too much of a spread in intensity of reps used. So we go back to that example at the start where it's 5 times 5, 5, 5, 3, 3, and then 4 times 18 to 20. Yes, you're ascending, but that jump is just wildly different. Here we see ascending, but it's not going too far and too broad. Likewise, I very much use a hybrid approach, but it's a hybrid ascending approach as well. So it depends on the stimulus you want. So that is everything. So that is session design considerations. A few things to think about, a few essentials of a training session. So we always want to think warm up, primaries, supportive, accessory. We want to be mindful of the interaction and the harmony and the synergy required within that session itself across other days over the microcycle, and how it should be related to the client and the phase objective in the context, and what is that macro cycle end goal. So there you go. That is session design considerations.